Good morning everyone, Country Flyboy here, and today, Basics Tutorial number 2. So I just finished recording, or at least from my perspective, I just finished recording tutorial number 1, which we flew from Alma to here. Nice short flight where we talked about basic navigating and airmanship. Today we're going to talk about how to practice takeoffs and landings, which as you might imagine are kind of important if you want to fly. So takeoffs are easy, so why would you want to practice them? Well, there's more to it than what we discussed. I want to say one thing before we get started, in that these tutorials I'm doing, I'm only going over the bare bone basics you need to fly in Flight Sim. I'll touch on some more advanced stuff as we go, but for the most part, I'm only discussing the basics, and it's only enough to get you started. I highly recommend you read things in the Learning Center. There are flying lessons there with an actual flight instructor. Rod Machado did the flying lessons in there. So those are helpful. The tutorials are helpful. For the most part, we're just going to be going over the basics. And this tutorial, we're going to be going over the traffic pattern, which is the best way to practice your takeoffs and landings in Flight Sim. So some people like to save a flight somewhere and slew back around, land, slew back, land, slew back. That is not a good way to practice your landings. The best way to practice your landings in Flight Sim is to fly the traffic pattern. So real quick, I'm going to shut the door. Alright, and we're going to get the airplane started up, and we're going to follow the same procedure we did in the first tutorial. So, master battery on, beacon on, fuel mixture full rich, make sure that is on, fix on both. And we'll start the engine. Engine is started. Oil pressure rising. I'll give it a little bit of throttle. Oh, forgot to turn the beacon light on. Oil pressure is good. Engine is stable. Avionics on. Alright, so we're going to select runway 7 for takeoff. And I'm going to get us out of the ramp real quick. Let go off the brakes, and we're just going to slowly taxi off out of the parking area. Around parking areas like this where planes are close together, you definitely want to go very slowly, even slower than you would on normal taxiway. Alright, so we're going to taxi the plane out of the parking area and towards the taxiway. Alrighty. We'll announce our taxi to runway 7.
Kilo Bravo Quebec, Kilo traffic, Cessna November 176.
And as we taxi, we're going to talk. Alright, so what is the traffic pattern? The traffic pattern is nothing more than a rectangle flown around the airport with the main leg of that rectangle over the runway. So, facing the runway on takeoff direction, that's called upwind. Crosswind is turning left or right and perpendicular to the runway. Downwind is parallel to the runway, opposite the landing direction. Base is again perpendicular to the runway and going the other direction, opposite from upwind. And final is parallel with the runway, lined up with the runway and the landing direction. So you'll see what we're talking about as we go. But just know that this is a rectangle flown around the runway and in close proximity to the airport. And this is how you practice takeoffs and landings in real life. I'm going to go ahead and turn landing and strobe lights on. And I think it's the best way to practice takeoffs and landings in Flight Sim because you get yourself into the routine of doing things. And that's the most important thing with landing, is getting the routine to make sure you know you're doing everything correctly.
Kilo Juliet Echo Sierra traffic, Cessna November 646, Foxtrot Echo is clear of the runway.
Alright, we're coming up to runway 7. Since we just flew in, there's no need to do an engine run-up. We already know the aircraft is working correctly. Now, for this video, we're going to do just normal takeoffs and landings. There are other types of takeoffs and landings. There's short field, soft field, water, high performance, you name it. But we're just going to worry about the normal takeoffs and landings. I don't see anyone on final. And and no one is on the runway, so we can go ahead and take off. Uncontrolled airfields like this, it's all see and avoid. So we're going to take off and announce we're staying in the pattern.
Kilo Bravo, Quebec, Kilo, traffic, Cessna, November 176, Charlie, Mike, taking off, runway 7, touch and go, left traffic.
Note left traffic. Traffic patterns are normally flown to the left. Although they don't have to be, they can go to the right. But standard pattern is to the left. Alright, so we're going to line up on the runway. Now I'm going to do two things. I'm going to stop on the runway real quick and do a couple things. So we're lined up on the runway now. I'll come to a stop. Now I'm going to set my heading bug on the heading indicator here, that little orange bug, to the runway heading. So that's the heading we want to fly on when we are on the final and on the upwind. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and take off. And we're going to note a few altitudes. Note this airfield is at sea level, so we can use 1,000 feet for our traffic pattern altitude. Traffic pattern altitude is always 1,000 feet above the field elevation unless there is either a published traffic pattern altitude or, yeah, that's about it. Or someone tells you to fly higher. Alright, so we're going to fly on this heading, stay over the runway on this heading until we are 500 feet above the field, which will be 500 feet on our altimeter since this airfield is at sea level. Now we're coming up on 500 feet. So as we turn 500 feet, I'm going to start a left turn. You want no more than 30 degrees of bank in the pattern. So left turn, I'm going to keep climbing, left turn to the heading bug gets to the next, on the right side of the HSI. HSI heading indicator. And we are now on the upwind leg. And this, or the crosswind leg, sorry. This is the crosswind leg. So we are perpendicular to the runway, heading towards downwind. Now, we've crossed 700 feet, which is safety altitude, 700 feet above the field in this airplane. If the engine quit at this altitude, could we make it to the runway? I think we could make it back to the runway, or at least make it back to the field. Doesn't necessarily have to be the runway. Alright, so now we're going to... We only want to be on crosswind for a short amount of time. So, usually when I cross 100 feet above safety altitude, so 800 feet above the field, that's when I like to turn onto downwind. So I'm going to start a left turn to get on downwind, and we want the heading bug to be at the bottom of the heading indicator on downwind. Coming up on 1,000 feet, we're going to pitch down to level off. And we are now on downwind. We're going to bring the power out to 2200 RPM. And pitch and trim to maintain 1,000 feet. And we are now on the downwind leg. We are also what's called midfield, meaning we are beamed the center point of the runway. Alright, so that is the traffic pattern departure. Now you see why the traffic pattern is a good thing to practice, because it gets you into the routine of doing climbs, descents, and turns properly. Because you have to do them properly to fly in the traffic pattern. So we're going to continue flying downwind. At the same time, we're listening on the radio and looking around for traffic because we have to work in with other airplanes. We're not the only ones flying, you know. Alright, we're looking for now is to be a beam the threshold, or the runway numbers. The threshold is these stripes right here. That's the landing threshold, and there's the numbers. We want to be a beam that. So we are beam the numbers now. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring the throttle back to 1500. We're going to pitch down, hit F7 to lower the first notch of flaps. We want to maintain about 80 knots as we descend. And we just reverse the altitudes we used earlier. Remember I said 500 feet start your turn to crosswind, 700 to 800 feet start your turn to downwind. So as we cross 800 feet this time, we want to start our turn onto base. There's 800 feet. Now, I said 800 feet. You actually want to start your turn on the base when your airplane gets to a certain point relative to the threshold. About 45 degrees to the threshold. So we're actually going to hold this heading a little bit till we get 45 degrees exactly, which should be right about there as we cross over the interstate. Now I'm going to start my turn on the base, and I'm also going to announce on the radio that I'm turning base.
Kilo Bravo Quebec, Kilo traffic, Cessna November 17.
And just like on Crosswind, we want the heading bug on either the left or the right side. It should be on the left side since we're flying the left pattern. Alright, we're coming up on base and we're at 500 feet above the field. I'm going to pause again. Alright, so you can see base leg. We are perpendicular to the runway and about ready to turn onto the runway final heading. So at 500 feet, I'm going to lower my next notch of flaps, pitch down a little bit more, and increase power some. And I'm going to start my turn onto final now. Again, you only want to be on base, not too terribly long. I'm getting low, so I'm going to increase throttle. Alright, so I overdid the turn, so we just want to adjust. I am really, really low. So I'm going to delay the last notch of flaps because that will increase my descent angle. Increase throttle to level off a bit. Get back on that glide slope. Okay. Last notch of flaps in. We want 65 knots in this airplane. Now we're going to do what's called a touch and go, meaning we're going to land, raise the flaps, and take back off again. Bit rough. Okay. Flaps are up, hit F5, and then apply full power. And get airborne. And now we rinse and repeat. Just do the same thing we just did. And that is how you fly the traffic pattern. So this time I'm going to do the lap around without pausing. Hopefully. Alright, so we'll maintain 75 knots on runway heading till 500 feet. There's 500 feet. Start my turn on the crosswind. Maintain 75 knots as we climb. Again, I want to stress that I want you to read the stuff in the Learning Center, particularly the aircraft information, because this is different depending on what airplane you're flying. Okay, now we're going to turn downwind. So yeah, I'm using speeds that this airplane uses. If you're flying, say, the Baron or the Mooney, the speeds would be different.
Number 737 November Hotel is 3 miles southwest inbound visual, runway 4. Kilo Bravo Quebec, Kilo, traffic Beach November 169er Bravo 3 is 2 miles west inbound ILS, runway 7.
Alright, we got traffic 24 miles west that we're going to have to worry about. Alright, leveling off at traffic pattern altitude, 2200 RPM, pitch and trim, announce we're on downwind.
Kilo Bravo Quebec, Kilo traffic, Cessna November 176 Charlie Mike is on downwind, runway 7.
Alright, wait till we are beamed the numbers.
Kilo Bravo Hotel Charlie, traffic, Beach November 232 Bravo Golf, taking off runway 8, departure to the west.
Alright, we are beamed the numbers. I have climbed a little bit. Throttle out, pitch down, first notch of flaps. Alright, turn on to base. Announce that we're turning on to base.
Kilo Bravo Quebec, Kilo traffic, Cessna November 176 Charlie Mike is on base, runway 7.
Next notch of flaps. Pitch and pitch for about 70 knots at this point. Turn on the final. We'll start pitching for 65 knots. Much better this time. It's a lot easier when I ain't having to talk myself through it, isn't it? Alright, pitch up to slow the plane down. Last notch of flaps. Use pitch to maintain 65 knots and power to keep myself on the glide slope.
Kilo Bravo Quebec Kilo, traffic Beach November 169er Bravo 3 miles west inbound ILS, runway 7. Kilo Bravo Quebec Kilo, traffic Cessna November 176 Charlie Mike is on final, runway 7, touch and go, left traffic.
Alright, we're going to do a touch and go this time. Alright, we're about 20 feet. Start bringing the power out, rounding it out, rounding it out, rounding it out, pitching it up, bleed off that speed. There we go, nice touchdown. Flaps up, full power. Alright, now this next lap around we're going to do a full stop landing. Okay, so that is the traffic pattern. Again, just flying a nice lap, nice loop around the airfield basically, a nice rectangle. Now, the reason it is good to do this is the best way to practice, is because it gets you into the routine and you know what to do, because the skills you learn in the traffic pattern will translate to flying in general. And if you can fly the traffic pattern, you can fly the plane. Alright, so it's just, this is the best way to practice. Don't land, go into slew mode, put yourself 4 miles away from the runway and try again. Even in a big airliner, you can do the traffic pattern, so. Alrighty.
Kilo Bravo Quebec Kilo, traffic Beach November 169er Bravo 3 is 14 miles southwest inbound ILS, runway 7.
He's 14 miles out, so he's still not a factor. We're going to announce we're on downwind.
Kilo Bravo Quebec Kilo, traffic Cessna November 176 Charlie Mike is on downwind, runway 7.
And we are landing this time. We're coming to a full stop. Alrighty, so we are beam, throttle out, pitch down, first notch of flaps. And you just do the same thing every time, that way you get into the routine of doing it. And as you do, if you do it at the same airfield, you start to develop landmarks that you can use to navigate. Alright, turn onto base leg. That traffic's
Kilo
just
Bravo,
appeared.
Quebec Kilo, traffic Cessna November 176 Charlie Mike is on base, runway 7.
Next notch of flaps. Pitching for 65 knots as we turn on the final. Announce we are on final.
Kilo Bravo Quebec Kilo, traffic Cessna November 176 Charlie Mike.
Last notch of flaps. Pitch up to get to 65 knots. Again, this is just normal takeoffs and landings. We are doing a full stop this time, however. Don't worry about doing things like short field or soft field yet. Make sure you know how to fly the plane first before you start doing the more advanced stuff. Again, nice long runway, so we don't really need to worry about braking. We can just let it coast. Alright, so that was the traffic pattern. That should be enough to get you started with flying the traffic pattern in whichever aircraft you've chosen to fly the most in Flight Sim. I recommend the default Cessna. It's probably one of the best ones to learn in. You definitely don't want to learn in the Baron, because that managing multiple engines is a bit more advanced. You want to start with a single engine. You gotta walk before you can run, basically. Alright, clear the runway. Flaps are up. Announce clear the runway. Strobe and landing lights off. Alright, so that was the traffic pattern. Should be enough to get you started. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.